Ladies and gentlemen, today is the day. With the trade deadline done, all the prospects dealt, I want to go through my updated NHL Prospect Pool rankings. Today we're going to be ranking every single NHL team from worst to best, seeing which teams have the best futures in the NHL right now. So make sure you watch till the end as we go through every single top prospect and where your favorite team might end up going. And hit that subscribe button if you're new for more prospect content just like this all throughout the year. Now, a lot has changed since my last prospect pool rankings all the way back in last summer, because not only have we seen a lot of prospect trades, we've also seen a ton of rising and falling prospects throughout the entire landscape this year. And plus, with how good this rookie year crop has been with players like Macklin Celebrini, Dustin Wolf, Matvei Michkov, there's been some incredible graduates, and that really changes how the rankings stack up here. Now, starting things out here, let's go on into number 32. In my opinion, the worst prospect pool in the NHL right now. And at the last place spot, we're going to go to the Colorado Avalanche. Now, this is for a couple of reasons. They haven't really drafted many picks over the last few years, and especially some of the top prospects they've had, a lot of them have gotten dealt. In the forward group, you have pretty decent players like Oscar Olsson, Jake Fish, who's having a solid year for Denver, Maximilian Horan, who's looking pretty good in the WHL this season, Christian Humphries in the OHL, and Taylor Makar as well, Cale Makar's brother, looking pretty good for Maine this season, but it's a pretty weak forward group. The big prospect, though, to me is Mikhail Gulyayev, who's right up there with Cal Ritchie, to me, among the best of Avs prospects, and even though this season he hasn't been overwhelmingly good, he's settling into the KHL nicely, and this year had 7 goals, 15 points in 67 games. Still, for a player that hasn't even reached 20, that's pretty good to see. Outside of that, you also got defenseman Nikita Ishmakov, who also is looking quite solid as a 19-year-old. You got Sean Behrens, even though he didn't play this last year, but I think the goaltending is maybe the strongest position here, with both Ilya Nabokov and Luka Klotzier. Now, Nabokov is the big one. As a second rounder last year, he's been unbelievably good as a KHL goalie the last couple of seasons, looking like one of the best Russian goaltenders out there, and that's good to see out of him. Luka Klotzier has another greatest season, but Chicago has been a pretty rough team to watch this year. He's going to Northeastern next season, starting his NCAA campaign, but a lot of talent, a lot of potential there. I think for the Avs, the goaltending will be the big thing going forward. Now moving on to number 31, not really much of a surprise here, but this is where the Edmonton Oilers lie, and another situation like Colorado where just continual contention and trading some of your young pieces leads to this type of situation. I think the forward group is okay, though it's very top heavy. You got Matthew Savoy as a big time scorer, Sam O'Reilly I think is a really perfect bottom 6 player going forward. You also got Maxime Beryazkin doing pretty well in the KHL, and Matt Caponi, who I think is a little bit underrated, solid player for BU over the last couple of seasons. The defense has a couple of names that I like. Bo Akey, of course, up there. Nikita Yevseyev in the VHL has done okay up to this point and playing in the KHL mostly this season. You also got Paul Fisher, who they traded for this season, and he's been solid at Notre Dame as a defenseman the last couple of seasons. And on the goaltending side, Emil Vinny, I think, was one of the better goaltenders in the 2024 draft. And I'm going to still put Rodrigue in here just because he's under 25 years old and has been okay at the AHL level this season. Nothing, I mean, that's extraordinary, but maybe a backup goaltender someday. For the Oilers, it's pretty thin, but players like Matthew Savoy, Sam O'Reilly, they're really boosting the pool. Next up at number 30, we go on to the Vegas Golden Knights, which I think is a team that has one really strong position, and the rest is kind of a work in progress. Trevor Connolly, of course, is the big forward name, though I don't think he's had a very good year, whether that be at the World Juniors or for Providence this season. Matthew Cataford has continued to do good things, though, in the QMJHL, continued to put up some pretty good results. I think Tomas Urban is one of their most underrated prospects, a 6th rounder back in 2023, and has been really good in the OHL this season. You can see in 63 games, 90 points, 38 goals. He's been exceptional there. But you also got players like Lucas Van Vliet and Trent Swick, who I think are decent options. Though on the defensive side, you got a couple names. Abram Wiebe is looking pretty good as a 7th round pick, looking really solid at Nodak this year. You also got Artu Karki, who's a young defenseman, but already doing some pretty solid things in the league as well, with the offensive jump that he has in his game. But to me, the big star of the show here for Vegas, the big reason why they're not in the bottom 2, is because of the goaltending. You got Carl Lindbaum, who I think is still one of the most underrated goaltending prospects out there. 7th rounder back in 2021, and he's done great things, whether that be at the SHL level, the Allsvenskan level, and now at the AHL level for Henderson, a .914 save percentage in 30 games. Love to see that out of him. But you also got Pavel Moisevic, who they got in the 3rd round last year, Cameron Whitehead, who's been a beauty of a goaltender for Northeastern over the years. So a lot to look forward to on the goaltending side of things. But outside of that, it's looking strange. On to number 29, and I got the Florida Panthers. This is a prospect pool that I've seen a couple of places out there having as the worst in the league, and I don't quite agree, though it's definitely not at the top tier or anything. But I think it is headlined by an absolute superstar in Jack Devine, who just continues to get better and better since being a 7th round pick back in 2022, which is just ridiculous, especially for how elite he's been for Denver. You look year after year, just how much he's gotten better and better. This year, 44 assists in 43 NCAA games. Unreal production, and a big reason why Denver's in the spot they're in for the 2nd straight year. You also got Grayson Sachin as a big one there, but players like Linus Eriksson, Simone Zephyr, Stanis Volmanis, and I want to give a shout out to Justin Sordoff as well, who even though he's on the older side, has been pretty good in the AHL, especially this season. I think brings a pretty projectable game and a pretty safe bottom 6 player in the future. On the defensive side, you also got a projectable player in Malik Alsher, you got Ludwig Jonsson, you got Matvei Shervin, and the goaltending side, even though Spencer Knight is gone, you do still have Tyler Muzelik, who's been pretty good for UConn this year, breaking out in a major way, a 914 save percentage in 22 games for them. He hasn't been the complete starter, but was a big reason why they were in that tournament to begin with. Now, this one pains me, but at number 28, I have my Dallas Stars, and I think they're this low for really a good reason, because a lot of their top prospects have graduated onto bigger and better things. Liam Bissell recently, Maverick Bourque this year for the Stars, and Logan Stankoven this year, and now for the Carolina Hurricanes. All the top players they've drafted and developed have developed into great NHL players, and that's a good problem to have. The rest of the prospect pool is just fine, I would say. Emil Hemming is alright, but really has not had the greatest year for Barrie this season. He's been okay, but nothing really overwhelming. You also got Antonio Stranges, who's having a pretty good year in the AHL, but is definitely a question mark in terms of translatability. You got Ayrton Martino, Angus McDonald's done well in the OHL, Chase Wheatcroft is a decent AHLer, Brad Gardner is just fine as a 20-year-old. I think the defensemen, though, are actually quite interesting. Aaron Menidian, Christian Kyrou, those are two guys I think will be NHL defensemen. Menidian in more of the physical role, Kyrou is potentially a second power play type of option. Tristan Bertucci is solid, and George Vagares as well for Cornell is okay. So there's nothing that I think is overwhelmingly good, but a lot of their top prospects are just solid, and it makes up an okay prospect pool. But unfortunately, that takes them out of the rest, which, especially considering the rest of the NHL and how good the prospect pools are out there, it leaves them back at this spot. Now let's move on to number 27, and let's go on to the Boston Bruins, who don't find themselves in the bottom 5, which I think is a nice change of pace. The forward group, though, and the additions they made, I think are a pretty big reason for it, especially from this last trade deadline. Fraser Minton, who they acquired from Toronto, I think immediately becomes their best forward prospect. As a former 38th overall pick, just a really sound defensive center, somebody who I think will be a solid third-line center in the NHL someday, but his transition pretty nicely to the Providence Bruins system, is playing quite well there in terms of the point scoring, so that's good to see. But you also got Fabian Liesel, who's finally getting an opportunity in the NHL. Will Zellers, who's been a complete beast in the USHL this year, one of the best goal scorers there. And then you got the slew of NCAA players the Bruins have, with Chris Pelosi, Ryan Walsh, Danslock Mellis, Andre Gassot, and even in the defensive side with Elliot Grunewald, and on the goaltending side as well, Phillips Wiedbach. I think the defensive side, though, is a pretty major weakness. Grunewald is the only one that I could even see having potentially NHL potential, but the forward group has been massively upgraded, and that is at least a sign of things to come. Now on to number 26, and around the same range I had Ottawa last time around. They come back at this spot. For the Sounders, they're in a similar position I was in at Dallas, where a lot of the top prospects they've drafted have come in and graduated already, so it's a nice problem to have. But outside of that, I think in the forward group you have some pretty good options. Javon Moore was a 4th rounder. You also got Blake Montgomery from the same 4th round, Badger commit, and looking really good in the OHL this season. But I also love Stephen Halliday, who's really transitioned well from the NCAA onto the AHL level, looking like a pretty interesting potential middle 6 piece for the future. You also got Owen Beckner, who had a really underrated year as a freshman for Colorado College. You also got Oscar Pedersen there as, I think, a power play option in the future. The defensive side, though, of course, being led by Carter Yakimchuk, who's the big one. I've never been the biggest fan of him personally, but still is one of the better offensive defensive prospects out there, even if the production, I think, has been a little bit disappointing this season. But you also got Hoyt Stanley as a big physical presence. Thomas Hamara brings some unique blend of skills there. And on the goaltending side, Levi Merolainen is the big one as well. 6'3", 3rd round pick. He's been a pretty solid goaltender both for the NHL and the AHL level this season. Pretty bright future there, and definitely worthy of being talked about. Now on to another team like the Bruins that I think has really propelled themselves over the past couple of years, and that is the Pittsburgh Penguins. I think they actually have some pretty decent prospect depth, which I think is really the first time I could ever say that. Of course, you got Ville Koivunen as a big-time forward, great in the AHL, and after a great Liga season, really underrated forward prospect. You got Rutger McGrody, Tanner Howe, Mikael Ulien. But I think the big value from this pool comes from the defense and the goaltending. Players like Owen Pickering, Harrison Brunicky, Emo Pinniemi, Finn Harding's been pretty good in the OHL this season season as well. On the goaltending side, Joel Blomqvist been a good AHLer, had some good moments in the NHL this season, but the Penguins defense kind of comes to bite him. You also got Sergei Murashov, who's also looking really good in the AHL level this year as well. But there was names that I didn't mention that I easily could have. Players like Max Swanson, Zam Plant, Tristan Brose just missed the list. So there's a lot of options there, especially the four group that just missed the top 10 for me. But I think for the Penguins prospect pool, it's really important that it gets going, and it definitely has. Now on to number 24, let's go on to the Tampa Bay Lightning, and I think they're mostly in this spot because of Isaac Howard. Let's be real, if a top prospect like that is in your pool, it's really going to boost it for me, and Howard is a top tier prospect. To me, one of the top 25 best in this league. We'll see if he actually ends up getting signed, but this year he was, to me, maybe the best player in the NCAA for Michigan State. Unbelievable performance all throughout the year. 26 goals, 26 assists, 52 points. Great there. We actually also got Ethan Gauthier, Dylan Duke, who I love, Connor Kurth, who's been a really underrated prospect. They just signed him. Great for Minnesota over the past couple of years. Jack Harvey, Jack Finley, Jason Sugabay, a lot of solid forwards coming up. If there is a problem with the prospect pool, though, it comes with the defense and goaltending, which I just don't think has enough depth. You have Jan Golicic, Roman Schmidt, who I think will be fine players, but I think fill out as bottom pair defensemen at their very best, and I don't think there's any goaltender in the Tampa system that will project as a future NHLer for them. So even though they have some pretty good forwards and Isaac Howard, that lack of depth, I think, keeps them from being higher. Now on to number 23, and just above the Tampa Bay Lightning, this is where we have the Toronto Maple Leafs, and I think for them, it's mostly lifted by the defensive side, but they have some pretty good forwards. Of course, Easton Cowan as the main one there. I also like Miroslav Holinka quite a bit, somebody that's been playing well in the WHL this season in his first year over in North America. You also got Brandon Lazinski, who is looking pretty good as a 7th rounder over in the WHL too. Nicholas Moldenhauer, even though the points haven't been there, I still like the skill set. But on the defensive side, Noah Chadwick, Ben Danford, those are going to be two rock-solid defensive defensemen. I also like Nathan Mays as well as a more defensive presence, big boy there as a 7th rounder. He's been pretty good for the Chiefs so far this year, which is good to see. And William Villeneuve is just holding on, I would say, as a prospect. He's actually looking pretty good in the AHL this season. Point production is up, which is good to see there. Even though I don't see him as all too likely to make the NHL, I think he does still need to be mentioned. And on the goaltending side, Dennis Hildeby and Artur Akimov, both in the AHL this year, have both been solid. Nothing incredible, but they're both likely fringe starters in the future. We'll see what happens there. But players like Easton Cowan, Chadwick, Danford, they're really propping up the pool here. Now at number 22, let's go on to another Canadian team here in the Vancouver Canucks, who I think are in a relatively similar position as they were to last July, and it's for one main reason. The star players are still pretty good. You got Jonathan Lekkerimäki there as the big forward. Outside of that, you got Aatu Räty, I think will still be filling in as a decent bottom 6 player. Anthony Romani, who just continues to put up pretty solid results in the OHL level. Ty Mueller, who I want to give some respect to, has been a pretty good player for Omaha over the years, but this year in the AHL has been awesome to see. I mean, 34 points, 25 assists in 58 games. Not too bad there. And I also want to give a shout out to Daniil Klimovich, even though I'm not the biggest fan of him. He's kind of risen from the dead a little bit in terms of the goal scoring this year. 22 goals and 32 points, 56 games, which, I mean, is making that pick look at least somewhat bearable, which is good to see. But I really like the defensive side here for the Canucks. Elias Pettersson I've always been a big fan of. I think was really underrated back in his draft year and is proving that already, being a decent defenseman in the NHL. You got Tom Willander, of course, is a big part of BU. Sawyer Minio doing well in the WHL. Kirill Kudryavtsev, who's doing solidly in the AHL again. And on the goaltending side, Aku Koiskinen... Man, these names are ridiculous. Aku Koskenvoe, who's been pretty good for Harvard over the years. I think just signed his deal and is going to be going on to the AHL, which is good to see. Pretty solid goaltender there, though I don't think is likely to be a hardcore NHLer, likely a pretty good AHL starter. Now, just outside the top 20, we're going to go on to another team that's been a contender for a while now in the New York Rangers. I think they've done a pretty decent job, though, keeping that prospect pool intact while contending. Of course, the big one is Gabe Perreault, who continues to look like a great pick at 23rd overall. I think he will take a little bit of growing pains to start out, but I think once he gets adjusted to the pace of the NHL, his skill set, his playmaking ability is really going to shine. Outside of that, though, in the forward group, I do think there's a little bit of a lack of depth. I like Brendan Hoffman, but I don't think he's the type of player that should be going where he went in the draft. He has some good physical traits and some good goal-scoring instincts, but it's hard to really see that translating all too perfectly to the NHL now. Brody Lamb is in a similar position, really good goal scorer, especially in the power play, but has issues off the puck. You got Brett Barone, Girard, who I love, but the Rangers just don't seem to want to play for some reason. You got Adam Sikora, Dylan Rubrick, but I do want to shout out to the defense because I do like Drew Fortescue, EJ Emery. Those are two guys with big physical tools that I think will be pretty simple defenseman in the future. And Jackson Dorrington, I also think, has a pretty good ceiling to himself with the smarts that he provides. Has been a pretty underrated defenseman for Northeastern. I think could be a bottom pair defenseman too. And on the goaltending side, Dylan Garand has turned into a pretty solid pick as a fourth rounder, looking really good in the AHL this season with a .914 save percentage. He's someone I think could be a pretty decent backup behind Shesterkin one day. Not quite yet, but give him a couple years, and I think he could be there. Now, getting us started inside the top 20, let's go on to the New York Islanders, who I think have improved their prospect pool year after year. Now, no matter what anybody tells you, I don't think Callum Ritchie is the next Patrice Bergeron, but he's still a pretty good player, and on the offensive side of things, really talented. You can see what he's been able to do in the OHL. I think he'll be a solid second-line center. You also got Cole Eisman as a true power play sniper. Quinn Finley is one of the most creative offensive wingers you can find out there. Danny Nelson, I think, as a perfect bottom six center. Cameron Berg as another power play option. And the defense, Isaiah George has been really developing well. Kalle Odilis is there as well. Jesse Polkinen. And on the goaltending side, I really like Dmitry Gazman and Marcus Gidloff, two players that are having solid seasons overseas. So I think for the Islanders, in really every single position, they got some pretty good players coming up. And if they are to miss the playoffs again, they're going to get another quality piece. I think especially for that defense, they could use some more juice in the future. I think that's what they'll target at this year's draft. On to number 19, another Metro team. Let's go on to the New Jersey Devils. Now, I think this prospect pool is really limited by the lack of big-time forward options. Lenny Hamanaho is the big one, and really the favorite there, as he should be. A consistent scorer, especially in the goal-scoring side over in the Liga. He'll be a solid power play option. Outside of that, I do like Arseny Gritsuk. Always have. Really underrated KHL player, almost a point per game there. Really does need to come over, though, because I want to see him badly. Outside of that, you got Cam Squires, who's doing pretty well in the QMJHL. Looked pretty good at the prospect scrimmages as well. Shane Lachance, who they traded for, I think will be a solid physical fourth liner. Samu Salmon, kind of a similar situation as potentially a fourth line center. And I want to give a shout out as well to Matthias Malofsky, who's actually done really well in the QMJHL. He was a sixth rounder last year as an overager, and this year 83 points, 57 games. So good to see that out of him. On the defensive side, of course, where you have Anton Salayev, Seamus Casey. I love both of those guys, especially Casey, and the offensive potential there. You got Daniil Orlov as well, who's really been looking good in the KHL level this season, which is good to see as well. And the big goaltending prospect, second rounder Mikhail Igorov, who was about as good as you could be on an Omaha team in the USHL that was horrendous. This year for BU has been sensational. It's really turned that team around in a major way. He, to me, is maybe one of the top prospects there, if not the most fun out there, right up there with Casey and Hamanaho and Salayev. Igorov deserves a lot of respect. Next up at number 18, well, let's go on to the LA Kings, a team that really hasn't traded for many prospects over the years, but I think for the picks that they've made, they've drafted pretty well, and especially this season, a lot of their prospects are performing exceedingly well. You got Liam Greentree as their 26th overall pick, who's been undeniable in the OHL this season. Cohen Zemer also doing good things in the WHL. Ryan Comney has been a really underrated sixth rounder for them, doing some great offensive things in the NCAA of New Hampshire. You also got Francisco Pinelli, Martin Kromiak, both playing real well in the AHL this season, which is good to see. You got the defenseman Jakub Dvorak, especially, who I think will be a solid bottom pair defenseman someday. You got Otto Saline, who's done some really good numbers in the Liga this year. You got Kirill Karsanov as well, getting a pretty major role in the KHL this season. But I think the big thing that props it up is the goaltending. I had Eric Portillo just outside my top 10, but he could be in there. But you got Hampton Slakinski, who's one of the best young goaltenders out there. As a fourth round pick, he has been unbelievably good in the NCAA this season. A .923 save percentage for Western Michigan. You got Carter George as well in the OHL, who's been great as well. He was somebody that was fantastic for Canada at the World Juniors. So those two guys, in my opinion, are really carrying this LA Kings pool. But still, players like Greentree, like Dvorak, you got some solid pieces there. Moving on, let's go on to number 17 in the Philadelphia Flyers, who I think have a lot of diversity within their pool. First, of course, on the forward group, you have Jet Luchenko, who I think is going to be a solid top six centerman. You got Denver Barkey, who I think is just going to be an absolute dog for them. You got Nikita Grabyonkin, who they got from the Leafs at the trade deadline this year. It's looking pretty good since joining them in the AHL level. You got Alex Bump, who's been one of the most underrated prospects out there this season, an unbelievable player offensively from Western Michigan this year. 47 points in 40 games for them. You also got Carson Dorwart, who they signed from the NCAA as well, from Michigan State, and also kind of like a Denver Barkey, absolute dog of a player, relentless type of pace. I think the Flyers are going to love him. You also got Cole Knuble as well as an Notre Dame prospect there. You got Alex Siernik on the AHL. The big weakness to me, though, in the prospect pool is the defensive side of things, because Oliver Bonk is a solid defensive prospect, but that's pretty much it. You have a couple other options like Carter Sutherland, Spencer Gill, who are fine, but just missed out in the top 10, mostly because you have two pretty good goaltending prospects in Igor Zravkin, a third rounder back in the 2023 draft, already doing pretty well in the KHL level, and Carson Bjarnason, who was a second rounder as well in 2023, and also doing pretty well at the WHL level. So the goaltending looks pretty good for the future, but especially for this draft, focusing on the defense might be the way to go. Now let's advance on to the 16th spot here, and let's go on to the Nashville Predators, who I think have a pretty balanced prospect pool, all things considered. Definitely weighted a ton by the wealth of forward options. I mean, just in the NCAA alone, you have Teddy Stiga, my GOAT. You have Matthew Wood from Minnesota, Cole O'Hara having a massive year for UMass, Aiden Fink, who's one of the best players in the NCAA already for Penn State. Then you got players like Igor Shurin, David Edstrom, Felix Nilsson, Joaquin Kamel. A lot of options I think will fit, especially into the middle six going forward. On the defensive side, you got Tanner Molendijk, Ryan Ufko as well, who I think could be a pretty good offensive D, having a really underrated year, I would say, for Milwaukee this season. The big thing is that they don't have a big-time goaltending prospect, but it's also UC Saros signed long-term, so I don't really blame them too much. But especially in this next draft, I'd like to see them get a top-end forward or a top-end defenseman. I think that star power is what this Preds prospect pool is missing. Now, going on to a pool that I think is actually pretty similar in the Winnipeg Jets. Now, they especially have gotten a ton from the players they've drafted recently. Of course, you got the trade going from Rutger McGrody to Braden Yeager, who I think will be a pretty solid player for them. Then outside of that, you still have Brad Lambert, you got Nikita Chibrikov. Kevin, he has been incredible since getting drafted last year, has been awesome for Niagara. You got Kieran Walton as well, one of the bigger jumps in the OHL this season. Colby Barlow, Zachary Naring out of Western Michigan, who's having a solid year as a freshman. Dmitry Reshevsky, who's still producing well in the KHL level. On the defensive side, I have always loved Elias Salomonsson. He continues to do well and is having a great, solid rookie season in the AHL. And Alphonse Frey also brings a lot of potential in the future. Like Nashville, not a whole lot on the goaltending side for me personally, but again, especially you have Connor Hellebuck there. So how much do you really even need goalie prospects? Now it's time to talk about the Buffalo Sabres prospect pool, which, yes, is probably the lowest it's ever been, but that's a big reason because of Buffalo's graduates over the years, just how much they've churned out of that prospect pool, and also I think that prospect pool also getting weaker over time. But I still think there's a ton of great names to talk about here on the forward group, especially Konsta Helenius, Brody Ziemer, I love a ton. Then you got a bunch of great Swedes in Noah Ostlund, Isaac Rosén, Anton Wahlberg. The defense, I think, is a little bit of a weak spot, but that's also a place where they've had a lot of graduates. You still have Adam Kleber, Maxime Sturbach, two right-handed D who I think will be solid defensively coming up, which is sorely needed for the Sabres team. But I think the big spot of brightness for the Sabres is the goaltending aspect, because you got to Devon Levi, who, even though I think I'm lower on than I've ever been before, he's still been playing well in the AHL this year, and I'm willing to give him some more time. But you also got Ryerson Linders, who was a favorite of mine back in 2024, having another great season in the OHL this year. And then you got Scott Razlov as well, having another solid season in the WHL, a 9-10 save percentage this season, starting off well in the WHL playoff. I think all three of these goaltenders are looking pretty solid. If Levi ends up becoming the starter, I think players like Linders or Razlov could end up becoming their backup, and I think the goaltending side will be pretty set. Now let's move on to number 13, and I have the Columbus Blue Jackets in this spot. Now this is a prime example of why a team being lower isn't necessarily a bad thing. For Columbus, a lot of the top players have been graduating. Guys like Fantilli, Marchenko over the years, guys recently like Kent Johnson and Nenton Machaychuk as well this year. They've had a lot of pieces go away from the prospect pool, but a lot of them have been successful. Still, you have some pretty good projects outside of that. Kane Lindstrom is the main one, even though he hasn't played this season because of the back situation. He's going to be playing for MSU next season, and that is a great place to re-energize your career. But you have a ton of wingers that I love on the team, like Gavin Brindley coming up, William Whitelaw, Luca Pinelli's going to be a dog coming up, Del Belbaluz has been really good at the AHL level this season, for example. And on the defensive side, you have some pretty good names like Luca Morelli, Charlie Alex, Stanislav Zvozil, especially more on the defensive side. And on the goaltending aspect too, I mean, Evan Gardner has been one of my favorite goaltending prospects recently. He has just been so consistently good at the WHL level this year and last. You also got Sergei Ivanov, who is a critical goalie prospect coming up, a 9-11 save percentage this year and 38 KHL games this year, which for a 20-year-old is very impressive. And there's a few names I didn't even mention on the list, players like Jordan Dumais, James Malatesta, I mean, Luke Ashton, Andrew Strathman, some pretty good players left off the top 10, but I think for Columbus, that just speaks to the depth coming up. Next up, let's go on to the Carolina Hurricanes, who are all about depth. I mean, that's the name of the game when it comes to their drafting style, and they've done a pretty good job of it over the years. In terms of their prospect pool, it's very interesting because it's actually a very defensive heavy. But in terms of the forwards in the top 10, I still have Brantley Nadeau, who's been terrific in the AHL this season. You got Felix Unger-Sorum, who almost seemed to make the team out of camp, but got back down to the AHL and is doing okay there. You got Nikita Artemanov, who is killing it over in Russia, 39 points in 22 goals in 63 games this year. You got Tamir Mukhomov as well, also doing well at the KHL level. And then you got the defensive prospects. Scott Morrow being something that we just saw recently stepping into the NHL. You also got Alexander Nikishin, Vladimir Grudinin, who's actually having a pretty good season in the KHL as well. You got Dominic Badinka, Simon Forsmark, Noel Franzen. A lot to look forward to there coming up on the defensive side. I think actually the 6th defenseman in the top 10 is the most out of any team defensively, the most amount of names on defense. So a lot for the Canes to look forward to on the back end. And this is what hurts, man, because this range of the prospect pool is really 15 down to 1 is so close and so good that I have to have a team like the St. Louis Blues at 11, which have some of my favorite prospects in the league. You got Jimmy Stuggerud, I think leading the way forward-wise, who's going to be an absolute killer on the power play for St. Louis with that terrific shot and good overall instincts. You, of course, have Dalibor Dvorsky, who is also going to be an absolute monster on the power play. You got Alexei Katskamaki as well, who's been pretty good at the AHL level this season, underrated 3rd-round pick. You got Otto Stenberg, and then you got a multitude of different guys like Adam Yeko, Thomas Mirsic, who's been really good in the WHL this season. You're right, Pekarsik in the QMJHL. Jakob Stanzel, who was an absolute beast in the World Juniors this year and has been as well in the WHL. Then you got on the defensive side, Theo Lindstein, Adam Juracek. I think Lindstein's probably my favorite out of the two, and I do think there maybe could use a little bit more defensive depth, but they have so many forwards coming up, like guys like Stuggerud, Dvorsky, that are so good, it almost doesn't matter. It is a fun prospect pool, though, man, with a lot of really interesting talent coming up. And hey, if the Blues keep offer sheeting guys like Philip Broberg and Dylan Holloway, they might become one of the better young cores in the league quick. Starting us out at number 10, though, and the best of the best prospect pools in the NHL, let's go on to the Utah Hockey Club with a great young core coming up. And it's pretty impressive how many graduates they've had, and great ones, too. Players like Logan Cooley, Dylan Gunther recently, that they're still in this type of position. Now, on the forward group, Daniil But is, to me, the prize of everything there. One of the more underrated prospects out there, and something that has put up consistent results in the KHL year after year. Big physical traits, though, and so much potential there with his hands. You also got TJ Ginla as just an absolute rock star and somebody that is going to be so hard to play against. Unfortunately, a pretty major injury to start the year, but he's somebody that I still have a lot of hope in. You also got Cole Baudouin as another just unfair player to play against, somebody you do not want to, the energy that he provides. You also got Vadim Mraz, who is a really underrated one as a 3rd-round pick back in 2023. The KHL numbers have been simply ridiculous. I mean, 26 goals this year, especially as a 21-year-old, is really good production. And then you got the defensive side, Dmitry Sibyshev, Will Skahan, Maverick Lemieux, Artem Duda. I mean, you just go through the list, and it's all big, physical puck movers, and especially players like Sibyshev, Skahan. I'm big fans of those guys. The beef that the defense is going to have here soon is going to be really fun to watch. And on the goaltending side, Michael Robel has really found himself this year with UMass. Last year was a little bit shaky here and there, but this year he had been an incredible goaltender. You also got Melker Thielen, who has played in the Allsvenskan this year, was a part of the World Junior team. He's also progressing decently as a 19-year-old. So I think in really every single position, a lot to look forward to there, and a lot of big physical presences. Now, at number 9, if you're looking for a team that's jumped up in the prospect pool rankings, I have a good one for you in the Washington Capitals. I mean, picking their top 10 prospects was so extremely difficult. But on the forward side, of course, Ryan Leonard is the big one, leading the way as such a consistent producer for BC over the past couple of years. But you also got Andrew Crystal putting up rookie Mobia Pro numbers in the WHL. You got Ivan Miroshchenko still there doing his thing. Tarek Parasek in the WHL. Ilya Protas being like the 2nd highest scorer in the OHL after his draft year. Ridiculous. Eric Smitejko being an unreal goal scorer as well through the World Juniors and the QMJHL. Even a player like Peter Sikora, who was a 6th-rounder for the Caps last year, is doing pretty well in the Czech League, playing against men and really having a great performance as well at the World Juniors. Then you look at the defensive side, Cole Hudson, of course, absolutely killing it, going from the 2nd round to being an unreal freshman for BU. You also got Ryan Chesley, Vincent Ioro, just a lot to like here. I don't think there's a ton on the goaltending side that really speaks to me personally, but you have so many good players in the forward and the defense group that I think for the Caps, they are set in so many ways. Now, at number 8, let's go on to a team that's always had a pretty good prospect pool in the Anaheim Ducks. Now, it's still pretty impressive to see them this high considering how many of their top prospects have graduated. I mean, just this last year, we got Cutter Gauthier, Olin Zellweger, and a player as well, like a Lucas Dostal, who's become one of the best goalies in the NHL this year. Just those 3 guys graduating is enough for a lot of teams to be way down in the rankings, but the Ducks are still in the top 10 for very good reason. I mean, in the forward group, you have a big, strong leader in Beckett Seneca, who is just so much fun to watch. The one-on-one ability is undeniable for a player his size. And you also look at the rest of the forward group, though. You got Lucas Pettersson, who was an early second-rounder last year. A lot of skill there, and he's translated it well to the Allsvenskan level this season. You got Austin Bernovic, who's had a very solid rookie season and freshman season for St. Cloud. Igor Sidorov's having a good year in the AHL. Maxime Massé is playing well. Kerry Terrence is doing his thing in the OHL. I think he's going to be like the perfect energizer fourth-line center in the future. On the defensive side, you got Stian Solberg, ultra physical D, Terrence Smith, another Everett Silvertip like Zellweger, who I think is going to put up massive numbers in the future. You got Tristan Luneau, I think, is a decent bottom pair D. And on the goaltending side, even though you have Dostal graduated, you have another Czech goalie coming in Tomáš Suchanek, who I think is pretty underrated. Didn't get drafted, but if he was like a second-round pick and putting up the numbers he's doing at 21 years old in the AHL, I think everybody would be like, yeah, that's translating pretty well. A .910 save percentage in 29 AHL games. He has really improved himself for the past few years and deserves all the attention he's getting today, though is not nearly enough. Now let's go on to number 7 and go on to the Seattle Kraken, who continue to just build a solid prospect pool coming up with just a lot of great names. On the forward group, you got Berkeley Catton leading the way to me, who has just been such a prolific, creative centerman and will continue to be. I mean, the production is just silly for a player at his age, and I think he's going to be a really fun player for the Kraken coming up. You also got Jagger Firkus, who's transitioning pretty well to the AHL level, having a decent rookie season there. Edward Shawley as well, Carson Rakoff, Ryan Winterton, Oscar Fisker, and Molgard. You got Yanni Nyman as well, who has just been unbelievable in the goal-scoring department at the AHL level this season, has looked really good for the Kraken in a power play role, especially this year, translating already to the NHL. Defensively, I think Tyler Nelson is definitely the best out of the crop they have going up. They have a lot of decent offensive defensemen, nothing that wows me outside of Nelson, who at 21 years old has already been doing pretty good things in the AHL level. And I also think the goaltending tandem they have coming up, the Finnish duo of Nicholas Kakko and Kim Saarinen, is looking pretty good. In Kakko's case, at 21 years old, he's already putting up some pretty good numbers in the AHL level, and Kim Saarinen, who was drafted last year in the 3rd round, is already a great Liga player and somebody that put up a .911 save percentage, which, considering his age, I think is really great, especially since he was one of the younger goaltenders in last year's draft. So really throughout every position for Seattle, I think they have a lot of depth, especially a lot of names I didn't even mention today that I think will translate pretty well to the NHL and AHL levels. But I think for the Seattle, especially for how little drafts they've had to acclimate this prospect pool upwards, I think they've done a pretty great job so far. Now, just outside the top 5 for me, we go into a team that's also had their fair share of graduates this year in the Chicago Blackhawks. Now, for Chicago, I think they'll be just fine. Even though they're in this rebuild, they've had a lot of players come up that have done well and have been able to graduate in a major way. 2 of those guys being Frank Nazar. Also, you have Nolan Allen on the defensive side. But still, for what's left, you have a lot of good forwards. Sasha Boisvert is going to be a really good one. Had a great freshman year for Nodak. Transferring somewhere else, we'll see where he goes. You also got Oliver Moore, who just recently signed. Merrick Vanacker, I think, is going to be a really interesting bottom sixer. Same thing with AJ Spellecy. I know the points aren't unbelievable or anything, but that dude is just so fast, so relentless. I mean, could easily fit in a 4th line. You got Roman Kanserov, who's done some really good things in the KHL this season, scoring at a great rate. You got Nick Lardis, who's been one of the best goal scorers, really, out of anybody, especially in the 2023 draft this season. On the defensive side, you got Arden Levshinov, just brought up to the NHL and already showing the confidence that he shows. You got Sam Renzello, who was just signed, and I'm going to have Kevin Korchinski as a prospect. I went back and forth on this. He's played, of course, a ton of NHL games from this year and last, but mostly has played in the AHL this season, so I'm going to downgrade him back to that spot. And then even Del Master also fits into this case. He's been up and down as well, but has shown some of the good puck moving ability and some of the smarts that he provides. Nothing overwhelming, but I think for the Blackhawks especially, I mean, there were so many guys I didn't mention, guys like Aiden Thompson, who has been great for Denver. You got players as well on the goaltending side like Adam Gajan and Drew Comesso. So I think for the Blackhawks, they got some good depth in every position, and especially in this next draft, going for that extra top end forward, I think could really complete their future. Getting us started in the top 5 in a team that has unbelievably improved their prospect pool, especially over these last couple of drafts. Let's go on to the Calgary Flames, shall we? A team that has 7 2024 draftees in their top 10, which I think is really showing how special that top 10 was. And you had Kirill Zarubin, who they drafted as a goalie, who would have probably been 11th on my Flames prospect list. But you have a lot of quality forwards, players like Matvei Greedon, Trevor Hoskin, who's been unbelievably good in his freshman year for Niagara, Andrew Basho with the talent he has, Samuel Honzik, Idar Suniev has been a beast for UMass. You got Luke Misa also, who has really improved this season, I would say, for the Brampton Steelheads, Jacob Battaglia as well, who has really broken out in the OHL, and then you got on the defensive side, Zane Parekh, who I think is the major one. I think the best prospect in the pool, somebody that has become one of the best defensive prospects in the NHL. You also got Henry Muse, I think, who has improved on his stock from last season, putting up some pretty good numbers both with Ottawa and the Sudbury Wolves this season. And on the goaltending side, even though Dustin Wolf is there, and I think that it will be the starter long term, Arseny Sergeev deserves so much credit. As a 7th rounder, he has been so good since his draft year, especially for Penn State this season. The 9-18 save percentage has been unbelievable down the stretch, and to me is maybe the reason why they are in the Frozen Four this year. Now, just outside the top 3, I'm going to go with the Minnesota Wild in this spot. And this is a prospect pool that I think can honestly be pretty subjective. I could see a situation where you have them more at the end of the top 10, maybe even outside of it if you're lower in a couple players compared to me. In terms of the forward group, I think it's just very balanced with a lot of great players in it. You got players like William Ogren, who I think will be a just really solid second liner in the future. Riley Heidt, of course, with the offensive potential he has, there's a lot to like there. Danila Yurov, I think, will be also a really effective middle six piece. Then you got players like Jimmy Clark, and on the physical side, guys like Rasmus Kumpalainen, Charlie Stramel, Rigo Lorenz, who's just a bulldog of a player. And then you go on the defensive side, where you have one of the best players outside of the NHL in Zeev Buum, who is just such a dynamic force, such an absolute tank out there with the offense that he's able to provide. Just is so much fun, so slick around the ice, and is always making you guess. I love him so much, and continuing to dominate for Denver this year. And David Jiricek's probably the second best defensive prospect there, though it really depends on your view of him, because the injuries especially have been brutal this year, and even when he has played, he hasn't been the best in that Minnesota system, so we'll see how he goes from now on, but it's something to keep in mind, as well as the same situation as Jesper Wallstedt. It seems like the Minnesota organization has a bit of a problem with injuries, and Wallstedt is also a part of that. Also didn't have the greatest season in the AHL up to this point, and that's a concerning step back to see. I'm still a believer in him, but I think this next year will be extremely important. Overall, I like the forward group a lot. I love Zeev Buum, and that's what really keeps this Minnesota prospect pool high, though it really depends on your view of a few of the prospects, because outside of that, the depth is a little bit lacking. Now, let's get into that top 3, and let's start out here with the Detroit Red Wings, a team that I think just has so much balance in their prospect pool in every single position. You got in the forward group Michael Branzik-Newgard, someone who's just going to be so much fun to watch as a disciplined player. You got Max Plant as well, who I think is a kind of an underrated one. He has been exceptional for Minnesota Duluth on a team that really has not provided much offense this year. You look at Nate Danielson as well, who isn't exceeding any expectations, but is doing okay in his rookie AHL season. You got Carter Mazer as well, who's been up and down, but also doing well at the AHL. Dmitry Bolchinikov, who just continues to get more and more production at the KHL level. Amadeus Lombardi has really played as well at the AHL level, at least when he has been healthy. And you also got Jesse Kiskinen. I would be remiss if I didn't mention him. He has been unbelievable in the Liga this year. I mean, last year he put up some pretty good numbers, 10 points in 38 games. This year, though, almost a point per game in the regular season and a point per game in the World Juniors, using that goal scoring to the best of his ability, which I think could be a really interesting threat going forward. But then you, of course, got the defense, and to me, the only one that I think has a massive future is, of course, Axel Sandin-Pellikka. I like Shea Boom, I like William Melander, but ASP is really the prize here when it comes to Detroit, and to be their best prospect. Consistently great results in the SHL, getting better and better every single year, the confidence growing every single year. I think he's going to be a massive part of Detroit's defense next year, and a major reason why they can actually start to move the puck. I mean, all respect to Ben Sherratt, but it's not exactly happening there consistently. And then you go to the goaltending, which, of course, is the strongest part of the pool, where you got both Trey Augustine and Sebastian Cossa. A great tandem coming up. I wish for Detroit it could be here a little bit faster, but it is what it is. Finding themselves at number 2, though, let's go on to a team that is really showing the future now and in the future, of course, in the Montreal Canadiens. Now, having a player like Lane Hutson graduate and still being at number 2 is really impressive, but I think that just shows how much pretty much every top Montreal prospect has been able to improve and improve. You got Ivan Demidov, of course, as the main one, the prize, and the best prospect outside of the NHL. As a 5th overall pick, he has been dominant, at least when he's been able to play. He's been a perfect player for SK, doing so many great things there offensively, and once he actually gets actual time on ice next year for Montreal, he'll be able to showcase those skills a lot more effectively. You got Michael Hage, who was the Big Ten Freshman of the Year in the NCAA, great statistics there, and he's somebody that, especially as he gets more confident in his defensive abilities, I think can become a really solid middle 6 center. But you got Owen Beck there as well, who's made vast improvements in the AHL, Oliver Kapanen, who's been extraordinary at the SHL level, a really hard league to succeed in, especially for a player that young, but was almost a point per game. But you also got the defensive side here. You got players like David Reinbacher, who have come back from their injury and played well at the AHL level this year. Adam Engstrom also doing well at the AHL level, and Logan Mailloux, who I have my doubts about defensively, but the offense, of course, and the goal-scoring ability is always there. But then we go into maybe the most interesting part of this Habs prospect pool in the goaltending. You got Jacob Fowler, who might be the best goaltending prospect outside of the NHL right now, certainly trending that way. As a 3rd-round pick, he's been my favorite for a while. A .940 save percentage, unbelievable numbers for BC this year. Didn't have the NCAA tournament go their way, but considering the complete lack of offense from the big guns at BC, it wasn't really Fowler's fault. What are you going to do with one goal scored? Not much. But you also got Evgeny Volokhin, who's been a really solid player in the KHL level. I mean, being over a 900 save percentage in the KHL at 19 is still pretty impressive. And then you even got Jacob Yabesh, who, you know, wasn't somebody that I thought would be an NHLer long term, but showed some pretty good things for the Habs this year at different stretches. Had some really good points there for the Habs, and even though the inconsistencies started to come, he's somebody that I think could maybe be a backup someday. So I think really in all these positions, there's not really many flaws, and especially with another potential 15-20 pick this year, I think the Habs could have a really good prospect pool coming up. But of course, Demidov, Fowler, those are the big ones for me. Ladies and gentlemen, let's now go on to number 1, the team that in my opinion has the best future, the best prospect pool in the NHL. Imagine having Macklin Celebrini graduate and still being the best prospect pool in the NHL. Well, that's where the San Jose Sharks end up finding themselves. To me, I love so much of what this pool has to offer. In the forward group, you have so many fun players coming up. Igor Chernyshov, who's been so good with Michael Misa. You have Quentin Musty, who I just love as well with Sudbury, a true leader on that team. Colin Graff, who's gotten and fixed into some NHL games this year as well, is on the line in terms of a graduated prospect, but has mostly played in the AHL this season. But you also got Casper Holtonen as a power play sniper of the future. Philip Biestedt, I think, is a solid 3rd-line center. And then you go on the defense. Sam Dickinson is going to be so much fun, so much potential there. Luca Cagnoni is going to be a power play force. Eric Polkamp, I think, has done some great things for Denver this year. That mix of offense and physical play, I think, could be really interesting. You also got Jack Thompson as well as more of an offensive-leaning D. And then you go on the goaltending side with Yaroslav Askarov, who is going to be a massive piece of the Sharks team. To me, this is the reason why the Sharks are at number 1. Getting that goaltending position truly nailed down was such an important piece for the Sharks core coming forward, and they got him in Askarov. I mean, what he's been able to do at the age level, especially this year, has been exceptional. He's had his ups and downs when he did play for the Sharks, but he also had to play for the Sharks defense, so I'm going to give him some breaks there. But I'm just imagining the Sharks prospect pool with a Michael Misa or a Matthew Schaefer, and it just becomes so much more interesting. It already is. It's already elite, but it could really change that Sharks future and complete it, I would say. There's so much coming up. I would like to see them add a really solidified top 4 right shot D, but I think that can come down the line. They already have so many of the major checklist boxes checked, and I think for this prospect pool, it's so deep, it has so much diversity, and I think for the Sharks, they're going to be so much better in the future because of it. But those are my prospect pool rankings. I just realized that this is going to be coming out on April 1st. This was not an April Fool's joke. If you disagreed with your team's ranking, I'm sorry. And just to also clarify, I just went through the top 10 prospects for each team and only showed those. But that does not mean that I didn't factor in the other prospects on the list, because those players absolutely did. So don't worry about it. If I didn't mention your player that you wanted to see, they are still factored into the ranking, just not on the top 10 list. So keep that in mind. But thank you guys so much for watching and tuning into today's prospect pool rankings. I've been recording this, guys, for 4 hours. So I'd appreciate it if you could hit that like button, hit that subscribe and hit the notification bell for more prospect content just like this. Comment down below all your thoughts on my rankings, what you agree, what you disagree with, and what your rankings would look like, and click on this card for all my prospect talk right in one playlist as well. I will see you in the next one. I'm going to go drink some water, eat some food because I might die if I don't, and I will see you in the next one. Goodbye.